Welcome to The Explainer. I'm so glad you're joining us today because, wow, we are looking at a story that literally feels like a Hollywood political thriller, but actually it is an absolutely real, shocking modern reality. We're going to look at how a tiny group of tech billionaires just pulled off a massive flex, forcing a total reversal of federal policy and prompting President Trump to outright cancel a landmark AI executive order. On the surface, sure, it's about artificial intelligence, but dig a little deeper, it's really a story about power and how the fundamental mechanics of who runs things in this country have completely flipped.
So picture this. You're the president of the United States. You are all set to sign this massive, highly publicized executive order on AI. The press is buzzing, the fancy pens are laid out on the Resolute desk. But your guests of honor, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, and Sam Altman, they just don't show up. They actually coordinated a full-on boycott of a White House signing ceremony. And here's the absolute kicker. Instead of, punishing them or pushing forward anyway, the administration actually canceled the entire executive order, just scrapped it, which really begs the question, can three tech CEOs effectively veto the president? To figure out how we got to this wild moment, we really need to look at what was in that document.
All right, let's dive into this. Part 1, the AI safety rulebook and what the government actually wanted to do.
The government's goal here was actually pretty straightforward. They basically wanted a centralized approach, a single, unified, one rulebook for AI policy nationwide. Because right now, tech companies are dealing with a total regulatory mess. California might demand one thing, Texas wants another, New York is doing its own thing. This order was explicitly designed to wipe away all those fragmented, unpredictable state laws. But there was a massive sticking point. The real deal breaker for big tech was the requirement for mandatory safety testing before deployment. The government wanted the authority to, look under the hood of these massive AI models, test them for risks, and officially approve them before they ever reach the public. Which leads us right into part 2, the tech CEO boycott, and this coordinated corporate resistance. Now, looking at this quote, innovation blockers, you might assume that's, Sam Altman or Elon Musk complaining about government red tape. But nope. That is actually a direct quote from President Donald Trump, who ultimately canceled his own executive order. The tech titans pushed back incredibly hard. They successfully argued that mandatory government testing would completely stall their progress and ruin American competitiveness. And this pressure campaign, it was so wildly effective that the president didn't just scrap the regulations, he completely adopted the CEO's own framing. He dismissed the very rules his own administration wrote as innovation blockers. Talk about a massive display of sheer, undeniable influence. But hey, just because the federal government folded doesn't mean the issue just magically disappeared. While the White House stepped back, individual states are stepping right up to the plate. State attorneys general are actively demanding these companies fix delusional outputs. Right now, they're firing off warnings to Microsoft, OpenAI, and Google, telling them to get their systems in check. So it creates this fascinating tension. The tech giants flex their massive muscles to dodge federal oversight, but now they're stuck fighting this sprawling, messy, state-by-state war against local officials who are deeply worried about how safe and accurate these AI models actually are. To really understand this, we need to look at Part 3, the 1962 Steel Showdown, a fascinating historical mirror. So you might be wondering, has a group of corporate executives ever tried to publicly strong-arm the president like this before? Well, yeah. Let's rewind to 1962. President John F. Kennedy asked the massive steel corporations to hold their prices steady to fight inflation. But at the 24-hour mark, the steel execs flat out defied him and raised their prices anyway. They basically thought they were untouchable. But watch what happens next. At 48 hours, JFK didn't cancel his policies. Oh no, he went on the attack. He launched immediate antitrust investigations and ordered the Department of Defense to start yanking massive military contracts away from these defiant companies. The result? At the 72-hour mark, the executives completely caved and reversed the price hikes. 3 days. That is exactly how fast the government used to be able to completely crush coordinated corporate resistance. So what changed? Let's look at Part 4, a massive power shift, and exactly why the government lost its leverage. Okay, so why did JFK win his standoff in 3 days while the modern federal government just backs down without a fight? 2 words: structural leverage. Back in 1962, the steel industry was powerful for sure. They literally built the country. But they only made up about 5% of the total U.S. economy. The government was, by far, the much bigger player in that dynamic. JFK could hit them where it hurts because the government controlled the defense contracts and the regulatory hammer. The economy was going to be totally fine if a few steel executives had a bad quarter. Now, contrast that with today. The tech sector, driven by the very same companies whose CEOs boycotted the White House, controls a staggering 40% of the US economy. Let that sink in for a second. 40%. The balance of power hasn't just shifted, it is literally inverted. These companies aren't just selling a product anymore, they're the fundamental load-bearing infrastructure of the entire modern American economy.
And this brilliant little table perfectly illustrates that exact shift. Look at 1962. Industry leverage was tiny, just 5%. Government leverage was massive. They could instantly threaten defense contracts. The outcome? Executives cave. Now fast forward to modern tech. Industry leverage is an overwhelming 40% of the economy. But look at the government's leverage. It is pretty much non-existent. The government is completely dependent on private tech to even function. The outcome? The president backs down. The harsh reality is, the government just doesn't carry a big enough stick anymore to threaten an industry of this size.
If you want concrete proof of that dependency, just look at this number, $9 billion. The White House recently had to ask for $9 billion just to buy AI chips for our own intelligence agencies and spies. Because guess what? The government doesn't know how to build these chips themselves. They don't have the factories, the specialized talent, or the infrastructure. Silicon Valley does. When your national security, your military, and your spy networks are fundamentally relying on products built by a tiny handful of private companies, you can't exactly regulate them by force, can you? They literally hold the keys. Now let's zoom out a bit to part 5, the global AI race. Because while America argues, China builds. This domestic power struggle isn't just happening in a vacuum. Competitor nations are watching this exact dynamic unfold very closely. Over here in the US, we've got regulatory chaos. Rules are fragmented state by state, the whole environment is totally corporate-led, and as we've just seen, federal executive orders get canceled if CEOs don't happen to like them. But look over at China. They operate with strict, centralized control. They execute with an authoritarian efficiency where AI deployment is entirely state-led. In China, tech CEOs definitely do not boycott government signing ceremonies. They do exactly what the state tells them to do. It is a very stark contrast between a messy, corporate-dominated democracy on one side and a highly streamlined, state-controlled system on the other, both racing to dominate the absolute most critical technology of our generation. Which brings us to our final section, who controls the future, and this fascinating new balance of power. So, what does this massive economic shift actually mean for you, the everyday citizen watching all this happen? We're ending with this question because, honestly, it's the only one that really matters anymore. Who truly controls the future of America? We elect officials to write our laws, to protect our safety, and to steer the nation. But when those same elected officials try to write the rules for the future of technology, and a few unelected Silicon Valley billionaires can just veto those rules by threatening to walk away, who is actually running the country? It is a staggering political and economic shift, and we are watching it happen in real time. Definitely something to think about the next time you boot up an AI tool. Ask yourself, who really decided how it works? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you next time.